This fourth edition of FIRA, first part, Robots, Farmers, and the Living. We are going to start with an introductory keynote, agricultural robotics, ethical and social question. We were supposed to have with us the speaker, but as you know, France is undergoing a massive social movement. So unfortunately, Alexei could not be with us this morning physically. We will have a connection, Skype connection with him, I hope, thanks to Ludo and his team up there. Do we have Alexei with us? Alexei?
Hello.
Oh, hi, good morning, how are you?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you perfectly. Can you hear me?
Okay, I think I can't really hear you, but I trust you can hear me. So just give me a sign that I can start.
You can start whenever. Go ahead.
Okay, so hello to everybody, and well, I'm very glad to be with you virtually. Unfortunately, due to the French strike, my flight was canceled, so I couldn't really be with you physically, but we will still talk quickly about some issues around agricultural robotics and the use of artificial intelligence in general. I will speak here in my private capacity, but I'm also a member of the French National Ethics Committee for Digital Technologies and Artificial Intelligence. So if we can have my slides, yes, I think we have the cover page. Now let's move to the next slide right now. So if you look at these pictures, you will see that, well, there are all sorts of ideas that come to mind when we see that. Well, look at this Australian farmer and a robot that looks like a companion, maybe a helper to that robot. But now, well, that companionship is one kind of relationship. How about competition, another kind of relationship? You see the ego in competition with that drone. So all sorts of relations are useful, but also competitive between machines and humans. If you look at the cow here, you will see that the natural world of that cow has been altered, has been changed with those glasses. She now sees a beautiful field with grass. And of course, that's only a virtual reality for the cow. So the usual way of talking about ethics of artificial intelligence when we apply it to agricultural robotics involves all these topics: autonomy, imitation of life, the relation between nature and artifact. We will not delve into all these deep topics right now in the couple of minutes that I have. There are other methods, next slide, other ways to ask the same question about ethics of robotics in particular. So one way, especially important for the lawyers, on your left side, you will see the different categories of responsible agents. Who is responsible? Is that the user? Is that the programmer? Is that the producer? Is that the trainer, the one who selects data for learning? We will again not delve into this legal map of the ethics of AI. We will talk now about, on your right-hand side, about different values. So, which values? Well, for start, of course, there are questions of social justice, the usual questions about privacy, fairness, security of these systems. They're not unique to agricultural robotics. We, of course, are also interested in security of autonomous vehicles, for example, or in managing privacy of our data collected by different systems. So these values are important. They're not unique. There are other kinds of values. So on top, on your right-hand side, on top, you see human benefits, usefulness for nature, loyalty. Well, again, we feel that we know what these values mean. They're expressed in normal words that we understand. But lo and behold, loyalty, for example, means something quite different here. Loyalty means that the system does only what it declares to do, declares to the user, or does to nature only what it declares to do about nature. So these values, again, they're known to us, but they have a special meaning in the world of robotics. And finally, there are values which are quite different. So in the second part, I'll talk about explainable AI, what is called XAI, questions of interpretability and their application to robotics. So that's our program for today. You will have some important recommendations in the text that was published last year on research ethics and machine learning, and also of course, in many other reports. So next slide. Let me start not by talking about explainable AI, but by first talking about the political issues that so you see here two politicians, a French politician and an American politician, telling us that these issues I've just mentioned, the issues around explainable AI, black boxes, robots that are opaque to the user, are somehow of political importance to democracy. And that comes as a surprise. Why are these questions that seem to us to be rather technical, why are they important politically? So let me spend the next 5 minutes talking about the political importance of these questions. Next slide. And if you now look at these two, I can't really follow the slides that you see, hope you see the same. So concerns around man and machine, the political concerns, are very much linked to the problem of trust. The problem of trust which exists throughout robotics and artificial intelligence, not just in the field of agriculture. And that problem of trust has become a political issue in advanced technological societies. But now, if you look on your left-hand side, on the polls that have currently been conducted in different countries, you will see that the situation is particularly strange. On the one hand, a lot of people will tell you that they trust humans more than AI or more than robots in different contexts. So for bank approvals, for trusting persons and things like this. So a lot of people will say, well, we don't trust AI. At the same time, they express hope and even the idea that the service will be better. So there are all sorts of opinions available when you ask people, and that problem of trust is not new to robotics or to agricultural robotics. Next slide. So that reminds me, let me take a little historical detour. That reminds me of another story we have lived through 10 years ago, when we again, with a different wave of new technology, we have seen the same political picture. The problem of trust, there was a lot of concern, but there was also a lot of hope that there will be progress and that there will be novelty. The debate at that time, the debate about nanotechnology, that is my example from 10 years ago, has been qualified as impossible, but actually it was organized in France. So let me take that lesson and tell you something about the political implications of this debate before we move to technical issues. Next slide. If you ask the French, this is the French poll conducted 2 years ago, you will see that the French society is divided into three parts with regard to nanotechnology, but indeed any new technology. We can see the same result when we talk about artificial intelligence today. So 1/3 of the French population, and this example is French, it's different in different countries. So 1/3 of the French population are risk-benefit calculators. So here in the middle, you see the blue third. They will compute the benefits and risks and compare them. And if the benefits are bigger than the risks, then they will accept innovation. But another third of the French population are risk averse, meaning that they will ask you to first tell them about all possible risks, all possible consequences, and only then will they allow this innovation to be put on the market. So the last part of the French society, the last third, are people who are not decided. And this is a typical situation across all new technologies. But of course, there's more to this political problem of trust than just the economic risk-benefit analysis. There is more than the calculation of acceptable risk. How do we know that? Next slide. Well, look at this cow. I hope you see the cow. The cow is exploring an automatic milking system. And one of the farmers told us, you know, the cows like to be on their own and to travel through the robot themselves. Well, definitely here, we're not talking about any sort of risk-benefit calculation. There are other kinds of arguments. What are these arguments? Well, these are what I call, next slide, the symbolic effects. You have here 4 very big groups of symbolic effects, of questions that need to be asked in order to understand how trust evolved with time. So trust evolved, but also the situation of humans, of technology, and of nature evolved. Well, first, let's look at the evolving technology. The evolving technology can become either faster or more powerful or more precise or easier to control. And these are positive values for engineers, right? The engineers want to implement these values, but also the evolving technology could become less natural. It could take a bigger distance from nature. Also, this new evolving technology can start to make non-human mistakes that we will talk about, for example, in image recognition. So the evolving technology, yes, becomes more powerful, but also there are other effects that come into being. But also humans and animals and plants evolve. So one very important thing for me is to think about the symbolic value of this evolution and how society looks at that. Let's look at the animals. We're talking about the increased welfare of animals. Maybe they're curious to interact with machines. Remember that cow? She wanted to interact with the robot without any humans being around. So they're free from human company. Is that a good thing? There's not that much human company needed anymore. But also, these animals could be constrained by emotionless robots. So are they actually served or are they controlled? I know that at your conference, a lot of titles of keynote lectures will use this idea of being served, service. Is it service or is that control or is it both? Is that change reversible or irreversible? Are we talking about, for example, for cows, about a sort of undomestication? All these questions, I don't have easy answers to these questions, but they need to be reflected upon and thought about. But now let's look at humans. Well, humans, how do they evolve? Of course, we know that a lot of people, especially those who don't use a lot of robots in their work in the field, they will talk about loss of skill. But those who do use robots always talk about new lifestyle choices, increased flexibility. There are more options for them. And also, there's a very interesting effect that I think is particularly important here. It's recorded through different questionnaires and interviews that the farms that use a lot of robotics will be, for them it will be easier to find successors, to find young people who would like to work at those farms. So yes, of course, we can talk about the loss of skill, but we can also talk about the easiness of finding young people who want to work in the field. So all of this brings me to this relational question. How is that proximity between humans and nature being redefined through new technologies? Is it about alienation? Is it about utility? And what is the picture of responsibility? So I've drawn for you a very large panorama of various questions, of various symbolic effects. Again, I don't have easy answers to all these questions, but I know what may happen if we don't think enough about them. Next slide. And that's the example of that debate about nanotechnology from 10 years ago. Some of you may remember that debate. We had opponents on stage who were telling us nano is totalitarian, who were blocking all debate, who were blocking all discussion because, well, we haven't engaged with them enough. We've probably not talked about these symbolic effects anymore. And that is not specific to nano. Next slide. We've seen, so that was in 2009, then 3 years later, we saw in France the same debate being blocked on synthetic biology. And the opponents were telling us, whatever your topic is, look at that quotation. Whatever your topic is, if there is a debate on genetically modified food, the nuclear, the nano, or synthetic biology, or today, agricultural robotics, that's because some individuals or groups have expressed without permission their political opposition to this political project. Now, wait a second. Political project? How come our research and innovation is a political project? What do they mean? Well, I think that they mean that it's important to have a conversation about all these symbolic effects. Next slide. And this conversation, it's organized, it should be organized between the research community and the business community, with the education community, with civil society, and of course with policymakers. So we call this in Europe, at the level of European Commission, this is called the Framework of Responsible Research and Innovation. It's a path towards ethics by design, towards ethical evaluation of R&D projects, and maybe institutional change. Well, those conversations, next slide, those conversations, we want to have them about the symbolic effects that I've been just talking about. We also want to have them about all the questions that you know very well, the legal questions, the questions of distributive justice, who benefits, who's expensive, how do we compensate for the inequality which any new technology always introduces. Of course, it always introduces some inequality. The question is, how do we work with it? Well, questions of security, questions of safety, all of that, the problems of all these things are problems of governance in this framework of responsible research and innovation. I think it's very important to think about these political issues, but also, and now next slide, I come to specific issues connected with the use of machine learning, with the use of artificial intelligence in contemporary robotic systems. Now, let me take a couple of examples. I will again only draw a panorama here. Well, when we talk next slide about image recognition, image recognition is important in agricultural robotics, but remember there are all sorts of applications of these algorithms across the field, starting from face recognition. Well, when you hear about face recognition, immediately you think about the values of security and privacy and all that debate. That debate is not specific to face recognition. There are also other questions. For example, things that can be legal in some parts of the world can be illegal in Europe. So like here you have a Russian example of the recognition of ethnic origin, which is illegal in the European Union. So you see that different values are always at stake when we use image recognition algorithms, but there is something very specific, and that is what I'm interested in. Image recognition, for example, for faces, works like this. It automatically, if we're talking about unsupervised learning, it automatically detects, emerges, there are emergent properties of faces, facial traits, about 80 of them. It depends on the system. But in our languages, we have only about 25 words, 25 concepts that describe facial traits. So 80 parameters and only 25 words. Some of them cannot even be made. We can just visualize them. We can say, well, it's in red here, but we cannot say what that is. Is it a problem? If you ask the police, definitely it's not a problem. The police say, we don't want to know how you do that. We just want to go and check the result, right? If the person has been correctly identified. Next slide. But now let's use the same image recognition algorithm, not for face recognition, but for recognizing medical scans in medicine. So you see, I'm taking the same system, I'm using it in a different application field. And here it will be as effective on your right-hand side, as accurate, as precise as it was before. But hope you have that slide on face recognition and medicine. But now, how do we deal with the problem of explicability here? Well, imagine a doctor speaking to a patient and saying, well, you know, you must undergo an operation. Why, doctor? Well, it's red here. You see on the scan, it's red here. So tell me, doctor, what is that? Well, it's red here. You see, you must undergo an operation. But doctor, what is my illness? Well, it's red there. So you see, there's a problem here. The doctor cannot just be content with this inexplicable, non-interpretable algorithm. They have to explain to the patient what is going on. They have to tell the patient what is going on. So depending on the field of application, the same algorithm may pose different ethical problems. Now, this problem called learning without understanding is just one of those. Next slide. But it's a very important problem because there are issues of, again, explanation here. So why do we need explanation? You have here a list of 5 points explaining why we want that explanation. Well, definitely not in order to predict the system's behavior. Actually, we want the system to be more powerful than what can be predicted by humans. So explanation here is important. First of all, in the cases when the system breaks down, we need to explain the failures. We need to understand what went wrong. And that's a big problem for learning systems. And also, I would now jump to my fourth point, we need explanation to establish trust. We need to be able to tell others what happened, what the system has done, and that is not easy. So that problem for explanation is one of 5 big factors that lead to ethical problems. Help me name a couple of other factors. Next slide. Here you have 2 leaves. You have a leaf on the left. It's green. It has a hole in it. On your right, you have a leaf as understood by the system. And the system will not understand the concept of a hole that belongs to the leaf. And I love this quotation from a recent paper that says that some researchers in machine learning have just discovered, surprise, just discovered that leaves usually have diseases or holes. Well, indeed, leaves do. So the specification problem, how do you specify in the programming language the concept of a leaf if it has all sorts of imperfections, all sorts of holes? How do we explain to the machine, how do we define the concept of a leaf? That specification problem is very important. For example, if you have a system that takes, that works in a field, and it needs to distinguish different kinds of plants and herbs in the field, will it always distinguish them correctly? Well, there will be errors, there will be mistakes. How do we specify what exactly is a good thing or a bad thing? How do we specify, for example, a man who sleeps in a field of wheat? Will the system know what is a man sleeping in a field of wheat? So that specification problem is a very important problem for image recognition. And finally, next slide, we have a problem of instability in machine learning. So here you see a panda, well, on the left, right? Now you add to that panda 7,000 of the noise that you see in the middle, and you still see a panda on your right. Well, lo and behold, the machine does not see a panda anymore. It sees a GRINBAUM. It sees something very different. And you would say, well, why is that? Well, because there's some pattern in the noise. Well, sure, but that noise, again, doesn't alter human perception. The machine makes some very non-human mistakes. And that's important for example, autonomous vehicles. We can easily induce the machine in error. And more generally, there can be adversarial behavior. It's enough to show the machine an image that it had never seen before. It will not know what that is. It will probably make a mistake of classification. This instability is a big problem for security and for possible adversarial behavior. Next slide. So in my book, I'm talking about 5 sources of ethical problems. The specification problem we have just seen, the problem of bias in data collection, you all know about training biases, the problem of learning without understanding, the problem of instability of learning, and the problem of verification. And I'm trying in my book to offer some answers. I will not do that right now because, well, definitely we don't have time for that. But of course, it's not enough to just ask the big questions. We also need to think about possible answers to those questions. And not only me, not only I have done that in my book, but other people, of course, have done that. And let me now tell you about this very important document, next slide, that we have just received in April from the European Commission. So this document about ethics guidelines for trustworthy artificial intelligence, I think is quite different from a variety of reports. You have all heard about a number of reports from different countries about AI and how it should respect human rights. I believe this document is quite different. So, of course, it starts with big values and big principles, but it acknowledges tension. It acknowledges problems between these principles. It's not always possible to respect all of them. Yes, there will be tension, and we need to think about that. Who are we? First of all, the engineers, those who are developing this technology. We need to think about these questions in advance while we're developing them. So what this document has, it has operational guidelines for the engineer. What kinds of questions the engineer should ask themselves? Next slide. So here you have a long list of 7 types of 7 pages, a checklist of 7 pages of questions that should be asked. Well, these 7 pages of questions, of course, I cannot go through all of them, but I will just, next slide, take a couple of examples. So one example, for example, we'll be talking about reliability and reproducibility of these systems. Are we messing up with slides? What's going on? Is it fine? Hope it's fine, right? So we're talking about robustness and safety. That's one of the many, many chapters in that long checklist from the European Commission. Again, there are many, many questions. Next slide. And there are altogether, I think, 17, even more of those chapters. How do we work with that checklist? Now, nobody likes long checklists. I don't like them either. But I think that for each company, for each research organization present in your room, because I'm not with you now, but for each of you, it's important to go through this long checklist and to ask yourselves, now, what is the subset of questions that you are interested in? What is the subset of questions that are relevant to you? And that will let you shape your process, organize your process of thinking about ethical questions in advance during project development. So that, I think, is a great tool for all of you. And now to finish up, let me tell you a story. So can I have my last slide with a big picture with an angel? Do we have that? I hope you can all see a young boy, a fish, and an angel. Right? So who is that boy?
Ludo, c'est la slide avec un ange.
That boy is Tobias. That boy is Tobias, and I'm going to tell you a story that's been invented long before robotics and artificial intelligence. This is a story from the book of Tobias, one of the biblical books that nobody basically reads anymore. And at the beginning of the book, all you need to know is that there's a young boy, he's 16, he's leaving home for the first time. And he's accompanied by an angel, you know, he's lucky. So he's leaving home for the first time, leaving his parents behind, and he walks for the whole day. And at the end of the day, as all of us do, he wants to wash himself. Well, they didn't have hotels and showers at the time. So he goes into a river to wash himself. And there's a huge fish who is approaching. And the boy Tobias is so much afraid of that fish. He cries, he says, Lord, he cometh upon me, he's going to eat me, he's going to kill me, I'm really afraid. And now look at the angel. The angel will not tell him, trust me, don't be afraid. No. The angel does something else. He tells him, take this fish by the gill and draw him to thee. And then when Tobias had done so, Then the angel said, take out the entrails of the fish, right, and lay off his heart and his gall and his liver, because you will make useful medicine, useful pharmaceuticals. You see, it's almost a story about pharmaceutical industry, but it's a story about the utility of these actions. Now, you should always interpret myth. This is a legend, but it needs to be interpreted. Was the fish big or small? How come Tobias was so afraid of that huge fish who was going to kill him? And just a few seconds later, he's able to take the fish by the gill and draw him to land, to the shore. Well, was it big or small? And I think, of course, you can have different interpretations, but I think that the lesson here is about novelty. That Tobias simply had never seen a fish before. He was afraid of this new thing, new unknown thing that came before him. That's fear of novelty. He didn't know what that was. How did the angel work with that? He did not tell Tobias, don't be afraid, trust me, everything will be good. No. He said, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and at the end you get useful medicines, you get something useful. So that's how this fear of novelty can be dissolved, by a procedure showing utility at the end. It's not very helpful to ask not to be afraid, trust me, right? That doesn't work. What works is a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 procedure with something useful at the end. And of course, the problem is that we are not angels. I'm not an angel, you're not angels. So we have to deal with the Tobiases of today, with people who are not experts in technology, but who will use it to do something interesting, something useful for them in the field. We need to talk to them the way Angel talked to Tobias, of course, in all modesty, remembering that we're not angels at all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alexei. Thank you for being with us. As a reminder, Alexei GRINBAUM is a researcher at CEA-Saclay, Paris, France, and he's the author of Les Robots et le Mal. And we should have a last slide with his internet address in case if you want to address him some questions, because obviously it's going to be complicated with the techniques to ask questions through Skype. But thank you so much for being with us this morning, Mr. GRINBAUM. Thank you very much. Thank you for your